Morning, everyone. It's Mayor Chris Jenson coming to you here from Noblesville for another edition of Mental Health Monday. I am glad to have everybody back here after a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. Perfect chance to talk about mental health, if you ask me, Kristen, right after Thanksgiving, because there's a lot that boils up in there. But I am joined once again by my good friend, a true servant at heart, Kristen Boice, the owner of Pathways to Healing Counseling. Good morning, Kristen.
Good morning, Mayor Jenson. It's good to see you on this Monday morning.
It's always good to see you. And like I said, this is a very important topic that we embarked on 3.5 years ago. You and I, you've been embarked on it for much longer than that. But we are trying to spread the word about mental health. And again, especially around the holidays, it's a very timely topic. So today we're going to cover a little bit about depression and coping strategies around that. You mentioned it when we were chatting before we went on, kind of about the weather right now and the doom and gloom. I said yesterday, Sunday was an incredibly gloomy day. Luckily, I was at the Colts game, so I was indoors, which kind of helped a little bit. But man, driving home, it was rainy and dreary, and it's colder outside here in central Indiana. I know we have folks from all over the world that are watching us, so hopefully there's warmer spots around the world. But I know here in central Indiana, it's pretty wintertime is upon us, and that brings a whole slew of emotions along with the holidays. So we're gonna tackle a lot of those things this morning. We invite you to chime in, to join us, to share this with your friends and family. If you have any questions, feel free to put it in there in the chat. If we can't get to it on the fly, we'll get back to you later about it. But obviously want this to be as interactive as possible. But before we start any of this, before we go down any road discussing depression or coping strategies or holiday madness, any of that, let's take a minute to breathe. And what better than a good breathing exercise? And Kristen, I'll let you take it from here.
So as we're coming down from the holidays, you might feel a little more anxious, more depressed, a little more stressed and overwhelmed. So I recommend doing this every hour. That may seem like a lot, but it's like using a muscle that we haven't used in a while. We call this square breathing. You're going to inhale through your mouth for 4. You're going to hold for 4. That hold is important as we kind of recalibrate, recenter the nervous system. Then we're going to exhale for a long count of 8. If that seems too long, you can adjust the numbers. The main thing is you're feeling your feet on the floor, you're coming back to the present moment, and you're recentering, getting out of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. That's that people-pleasing part of us that is in a survival mode into more of a thriving mode. So we're coming from the sympathetic, what we call the sympathetic. It's that heightened, like hypervigilant state, to what we call the parasympathetic. Think of peace, parasympathetic, coming back into the peaceful, calm state. So let's practice 2 breaths together. Feet on the floor, kind of relaxing in your chair. If you're standing up, just kind of grounding into your feet. Big, deep inhale through your nose. We're going to hold and then release slowly out your mouth like you're cooling soup.
I instantly feel that so much better.
Yeah, you can really feel your nervous system kind of letting go of that tension and tightness. If you do have tension and tightness in your body, maybe you feel it in your shoulders or your neck, or maybe your back of your neck, you're going to breathe into that space where you feel the tightness in your body. So let's do it one more time, breathing into those tight spaces. Deep inhale through your nose. And let's exhale out our mouths. I could just feel my shoulders just drop. And that's really important, that you're letting out anything you're holding in. And that's a big part of what we'll be talking about today with depression.
So, yeah, and I always like to chime in on this as a parent of young kids. Kristen, you're a parent of more teenage kids, but teaching this breath activity early on is so impactful. I've seen our kids at a very young age pick up on it. And even encourage each other to breathe and work through some. And now I have a 2.5-year-old who doesn't, tantrum is the tantrum, but the other ones tend to be a little bit better on the breath. So again, please model that. Talk to your kids about the importance of it. Tell them to, take a quick break and breathe, because it does transcend generations down and passing those habits down there, which is all a part of this entire conversation here today. So, all right, let's dive in a little bit around depression. Again, if you're tuning in, feel free to say hi or ask any questions in the chat. We love to hear from folks along the way here. But we're gonna dive in on depression, and that word gets thrown around a lot, Kristen. I would love to chat for just a second too on the outset here around the topic of seasonal depression. I think there's a differentiation between the two, and that's really your space. So would love for you to chime in. I know I have suffered in the past from seasonal depression. And especially in the winter months, I think even years ago, I think I even went to like the tanning bed, which I'm sure we're not supposed to talk about anymore because, with skin cancer, I'm pretty sure I did that back in the day to help get through that. I know there's lamps, there's all sorts of things you can do around this topic. So let's talk about seasonal depression, what that is, and maybe some tricks for that before we move into an entire topic of depression, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. I love the word seasonal because that helps you kind of differentiate when you feel, typically you're feeling interest and joy in your daily activities. You might feel some motivation when there's seasonal changes and we have more dark rather than light. Our nervous systems and our bodies feel that. We produce less serotonin. So there actually is a reason why we feel less joy and more sadness during the seasonal change, especially when we change to daylight savings time. At least here in Indiana, people feel that difference in that daylight. We have less daylight. And so when we have less daylight and in the winter months, we start feeling that we're less likely to be outside. Some people still get out there and walk. That's fantastic. We're less likely to be out in nature. And so we're seeing the difference in our nervous systems without being outside in the sunlight and in nature. We're less active. And so during those times, we will see a change in our mood. So depression is really, and I don't like saying this word, but they call it a mood disorder for those that are, we're looking at technical terms because we're having less interest in daily activities and less motivation. And so the difference between the two is during the seasonal time, it's only limited to those seasonal months. So it might be the fall, winter months, and then you're coming out of it in spring and summer and you feel different. Depression can last 2 weeks or longer, depending on the intensity of the depression. And it's just not limited to seasonal change. So those are the two distinguishing factors.
That's incredibly helpful, and I think I think folks realize their mood changes a lot this time of year, and it can be depressed mood, it can be anxiousness around the holidays, which we're going to kind of cover next month a little bit too, kind of coping with the holiday stress. So kind of differentiating, knowing that it is a chemical reaction in your body, which I think is helpful for some folks to realize. It's not just you. I mean, it's a natural thing, and it's pinpointed in science. I think that's helpful for people to understand. In terms of folks that might be dealing mostly with seasonal depression, what do you suggest as kind of remedies or suggestions for folks that might be tackling that today?
I'm going to get some highlights. The first one is get yourself a light. You can get them at Costco. You can get them on Amazon.
We just opened a brand new Costco in Noblesville, by the way, last week. I know your husband was there with me. We did some damage there on Black Friday. So anyways, little plug for Costco.
Yes. So you can get them anywhere. I definitely recommend consulting your doctor first. Also, if you feel like this is really affecting your functioning, you're not getting out of bed, you're having trouble showering, the hygiene, your sleep is impacted and your eating, I highly recommend consulting your physician or a psychiatrist. So I definitely want to say that. In terms of just kind of your day-to-day activities, if you can get outside, and I know on these, like yesterday, no one wanted to be outside. It's rainy, it's cold, it's dreary. Get yourself by a window. So light and being close to nature, watching nature outside, whether you see, we have eagles here around where we live, and that just brings me so much joy to see the eagles. Look for wildlife. Next, I recommend, if you have a pet, I recommend getting a pet. Oftentimes during those seasonal months, we feel lonely. We feel increased sense of isolation and loneliness. And pets are proven scientifically to help our mood and that sense of loneliness. The third thing is getting out with other people. And when we feel depressed, we don't want to be with other people a lot of times. We want to isolate. This is really important that you have a support system that you can do vulnerability, you can be authentic, and you can say, hey, I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling sad. So having a support system, whether that's, at church, or you have friends in the neighborhood, or you have friends from different walks of life, maybe coworkers, reach out to them. Have a support group where you can check in with each other and say, how you feeling? How you doing? Get a journal, write out how you feel. And movement can help. I know we don't want to move, but even if you could do some online, YouTube exercise videos, maybe you want to go, just on a 5-minute walk a day, that is proven to scientifically help you, combined with the light therapy, combined even with going to therapy, can really help increase that sense of isolation, depression, and loneliness.
That's awesome. Thank you. And like I said, I know in the past when I have dealt with seasonal depression, movement has been key for me. Trying to up my Orange Theory workouts, go a little bit more often, get on the treadmill in the morning just to get the body moving. Again, even though you don't want to, certainly helps you process this time of year in particular. So, all right, well, great. Well, like I said, I couldn't touch on depression without talking about seasonal depression. Because again, the last couple of days, although the sun is trying to come out here in central Indiana, but the last couple of days have been a little rough in that area if you do suffer from that. So let's transition to overall depression. Again, it's a word that is probably thrown around a lot in society these days. But can you talk a little bit about the definition of it and obviously what it looks like for folks that it looks like maybe in you, and then maybe what you would identify in others, what it might look like in them?
Yeah, so let's talk about statistics and then we'll define depression. So 1 in 6 adults will have depression. That's reported depression. What we know is that number is really low. So like 17% of the population in the United States has depression. We think that's a lot higher because we're not reporting. And those, when we're lonely and we feel sad, we tend to isolate more. And then now we're seeing the highest depression rate in history in teens. And this is alarming because we're seeing more social isolation with the use of social media. We are seeing more in terms of we think we're connecting to people online, but we're not getting out there in person to connect with people. And we know when we're feeling depressed, connection is critical, even though we don't feel like we want to connect with anybody. This is the juxtaposition of it.
Can I point out something that you just pointed out was really, really interesting to me? So you said about reporting depression, and that's been something, we have been focused here in Noblesville for the past, almost 4 years now, heavily on mental health. And we have seen our numbers skyrocket in terms of mental health reported calls to public safety and reporting. And at first that was kind of alarming, but then what is making the most sense to us is that we are talking about it more. We're kind of erasing that stigma, normalizing this conversation. So more and more people are feeling more comfortable reporting that. And that is hugely important. So I just wanted to point that out, that, that we're seeing a direct correlation with the more we're talking about it, the higher number we're actually getting calls or calls for service on, because people are feeling more comfortable talking about this, which I think is great. So sorry for the sidebar there, but I think that's something that has been eye-opening to me, is the reporting data on that.
And that to me is why I do this job, because when we can get out of the shame of something's wrong with me, I feel like I am defective, I am bad, I am wrong, I am a mistake. Those are things that take us away from asking for help or seeking help. And so that's why I love the 988 number. Like if you are feeling suicidal, and often that does come with depression, we can feel suicidal or have suicidal thoughts or ideation or kind of feel worthless or feel like a burden. That 988 number you can call or text any time and it's free. And this is what I cannot emphasize enough. If you don't want to reach out to somebody else, reach out to 988. They are there to help you. And when you can say, okay, depression it's a mood, technically, again, it's a mood disorder, looking at our decreased sense of interest in daily activities or functioning. We will tend to isolate more. We might sleep more or less. It could affect you either way. Maybe we're upping the consumption of alcohol, which is a depressant, which will make you feel 10 times worse. So when we're trying to self-medicate, maybe we're taking more substances that we normally wouldn't take. Maybe we're eating more, eating less. Maybe we're not showering, or we're not taking care of our hygiene because we are feeling sad or we're feeling isolated and lonely. There's many different warning signs. Typically, you're going to see somebody really, maybe they're more angry, they're more irritable, or maybe they're withdrawn and sullen. When you try to interact with them, maybe they're not themselves. You'll notice a marked difference in how they were and how they are now. I need to distinguish the difference between grief and depression. So when someone comes in to me and they're like, I'm depressed, I'm like, well, tell me more about it. And they start telling me about a loss. Maybe it's a pet loss. Maybe they lost a job. Maybe they've gone through a divorce. Maybe they have, had share custody of their kids and they're not seeing their kids as much. Maybe there's been a death. That is called grief. And that is a normal response to the circumstances. And there's a difference between grief and depression. Grief is, it kind of comes, it'll at the beginning, it feels like it's depression because we're feeling sad, we're feeling more isolated, we're feeling more lonely because it's rocked your world. That makes sense given what's happened. Depression is different. We're not associating that with necessarily grief. There might be a repression of your feelings. There might be a repressed part that needs to be tended to from your past. Maybe you didn't get to process trauma as a child. Maybe you didn't get to process how you felt. Maybe you had hidden parts of yourself and you had to repress them or suppress them in order to survive. I often look at what are the suppressed or repressed parts that now look like depression, but really it's suppression because it was a survival state. And that's a different way to think about depression than we normally do. Now, certainly there could be something chemically going on. That's why I recommend going to your doctor, consulting a psychiatrist or physician, or certainly a therapist to find out, is there something more? How do I get to the root? How do I get to the heart of it? Maybe there was a trigger that started the depression that you don't even know. Maybe it's a body memory. And all of a sudden you're like, I was fine and now I'm not fine. That could be because there's a repressed emotion, body sensation, something that needs to be reprocessed, meaning I identify, I feel where I feel it in my body. I can start working through the emotions and the beliefs I have about myself, like I'm an idiot or I'm a no good, whatever. Those are beliefs that come from a long time ago from trauma. And grief really is about circumstances in the present moment. And grief can also be triggered by something in the past if you did not get a chance to actually grieve it in the moment. So it's important to go, is this grief because I have a loss of some sort, a major change that's makes sense given circumstances, or has something just shifted inside of me? And maybe it's hormones. Maybe you have a medical issue that needs to be tended to. That can come with grief. So if you have it let's say you've got newly diagnosed with cancer, maybe there is a correlation between what's going on in your nervous system and your body that needs medical attention. So that's why I highly recommend getting blood work, getting a workup, make sure that we can rule out there's nothing physically going on, so we can also deal with the emotional components at the same time, because we know that trauma lives in the body. So it's super important that we're tending to all those facets when we look at depression.
So really kind of distinguish between, I guess one of the first questions you'd ask yourself is, have I suffered a lot? Because you would want to tackle the grief first, correct? Would that be the first thing to kind of check off the list, but to kind of identify when looking at maybe a change in mood?
Yes. And we don't want to push down grief because that will lead to depression. Okay. So if we have gone through a loss of any kind, job, person, pet, divorce, a transition, a relationship loss, it's important we process and identify those feelings rather than medicate them, bypass them, push them away. And I don't mean medication as in we might need some medication to help us get through it. I really want to make sure we're processing those feelings of sadness and not pushing them down, which will then turn into depression.
Got it. Okay. That's actually really helpful to kind of view as kind of like the here and now versus a long-term past traumatic situation that maybe would trigger a depressing thought or depression going forward. That's really, really fascinating. So talk a little bit about what depression looks like, what kind of feelings in the body would you have as an individual? You talked about like identifying others, the change in mood, the angry, the withdrawn, the sullen, I think you used, good word, by the way. What would it feel? What would I feel like?
Heaviness. Typically you feel a real lethargic, exhausted, heaviness. It's almost like a weight, like you just feel like this heavy weight and you can't really put your finger on. A lot of times when you're in depression, you kind of feel like I feel blah, I have no motivation. So in the body, it will feel very heavy, tense, tight. That's the best way people exhausted, like a severe exhaustion. People would just say, I have no energy. I feel so lethargic. I just don't have any motivation. I just feel like, what's the point? Those are all red flags. And if you're increasing your drinking, or you're not sleeping enough, or you're not eating enough, you're not getting enough sleep, maybe you're sleeping too much or too little, those are all signs to really seek some help. And there's nothing wrong with you. That's what I want to say. Just because this is what you're experiencing now doesn't mean that you're defective. It just means it's a sign for you to tend to yourself. Maybe there's more self-care that's needed. Maybe there's some advocacy on your part to say, hey, I don't feel right, and I need to seek some medical attention or some therapy to tend to that. And that will change your life. We want other people a lot of times to see that we're in pain, and other times people just maybe aren't in touch with their own emotions, so they can't really offer you empathy. So sometimes we have to really work on seeking a support system that could give us and help us heal and get where we need to go, which is feeling better.
Well, and that's what, you talked a little bit about coping in terms of reaching out for help and doing those things. Before we get to really to dive in on some coping skills to wrap things up, but I want to touch on what depression, does it look differently in maybe kids, teens? Can kids be depressed? What does that look like? I imagine it looks differently, because you've taught us over the last several years that a lot of things look differently in young adults or kids. So I want to kind of touch on that as a parent of children.
Yeah, so let's talk about kids. 4.4% of children are depressed. Think about that. That is a lot of depression in kids. Are they too much into technology? Are they too much on video games? Are they watching too much TV? Are they too much on their phone? That will affect mood with children because it affects their brain. This is super important. We're having a lot of research come out now with brain scans and how that lights up in children, and how that can mirror what looks like trauma in the brain, which can lead to depression. And what we say, okay, what now? Okay, we're going to limit our technology. I know this is tough. It's hard. I'm a parent. I get it. And especially in teens, I will see a high correlation by the number of hours that a child or a teen is on technology correlated with depression and anxiety. And this is hard to say, but it does affect their development. So what we need to be doing more of is talking and connecting to our children about how they're feeling, about what excites them, about who they are, what they like, what they don't like. Put your phone down. This is so hard. I get it. I'm a parent. I am a person too, and I can get on my phone and get working. I will put it down when I'm with my children. And this is a habit that I work on constantly, because they need our presence and attunement. What does attunement means? It means I am here with you. I am noticing, I'm looking in your eyes. If we see a vacant look in our children's eyes, chances are they're experiencing some suppressed emotions, might be going through some depression. If they're not taking care of themselves, they are isolating themselves. Maybe they're crying, or maybe they're just kind of stoic. Those are signs that they may need some therapy, and they need your attention. And I don't mean like hypervigilant attention. I mean your presence. And that looks like just facing them when you're talking to them. You're looking at them. You're saying, oh, I care about you. I'm so glad you're my child. I'm so glad, like I'll say to my daughters, I'm so glad you were born. I'm so happy you were born. Like, it was one of the best days of my life. And I truly mean it. Even on those bad days, I really mean it. And I want them to know that they matter, and I'm a safe place to come when they have hard things happen, because they will. It's important that you are the safe place for them to come and talk about what's happening.
And again, I think so much comes back to modeling that behavior, right? And it's showing, and again, so guilty. My phone is, I sleep with it like right by my head. Just super guilty of all this, by the way. I laughed this morning. I drove the 6:30 a.m. carpool of 5 7th grade boys going to basketball practice this morning, and it was nice and silent in the car, and I thought they were all asleep, but no, they were all, and they're like staring at their phones, playing some games on there. And so I always try to ask them about their day or the presidential debates and whatever, and they usually just roll their eyes at me. But I try to just keep hammering questions and asking them to make them talk to me, as much as they absolutely hate it. But again, it's totally true. Their heads are right in the phone all the time. So trying to get them to put that down and look up is key. I'm certain of that. So
well, I love that you're doing that, because I was at a coffee shop, and we've all done this. So
Yep.
I'm not saying, I'm not throwing stones, believe me.
Mhm.
There was a son and a dad, and the son, he was about 7, was just looking at his dad so admiringly and wanting his dad's attention, but the dad was on the phone the entire time, and he just sat there looking for his dad to pay attention to him. And it's like, these opportunities are so critical, and they seem like a moment in time, but they matter. So just notice if, and then that's modeling. The dad was, the son's not on his phone, but the dad was. This is so important, that moment in the car when you have them, for you to be present. So, not that you're going to be on your phone, because it's not safe,
Right.
but those moments matter so much.
I do. Yeah. So let's talk about coping. And I want to call out, I know David and Brad have both chimed in on issues that they're usually frustrated about. I just want to say I'm glad that they're watching Mental Health Monday. And so let's share some coping strategies with folks like David and Brad on if they are faced with depression, or anybody that they may know, or anybody, any one of us that may be struggling with it. What are some good coping strategies? You talked about what to look for in others. You talked about what it looks like in kids. So let's transition to coping.
Yeah. So the first thing is recognizing your own way you feel, self-awareness. Take responsibility. Okay. The minute you start to say, okay, I think I need to, help myself feel better, and I'm going to take action for it. It's very hard when you're depressed, because you don't feel like doing anything. And so the key is to, 1, recognize it. 2 is start deep breathing. 3 is start processing what you're feeling, because we can focus on external things, but that's not really going to make you feel better. What is going to make you feel better is start focusing on the internal. What are you feeling? What's going on inside? How can you break generational patterns for yourself? And that's advocating for yourself. So it's asking for help. I can't emphasize that enough. Again, 988. Getting into a support group, going to therapy, talking to a friend. I mean, we can keep going on how to ask for help. Get on the internet, look up depression, how to work through depression. Now we have so many resources out there that use what you have. If you can get out and walk, again, love that. Or if you have a treadmill at home, 5 minutes a day, or what you're physically able to do. And maybe it's volunteering. I love volunteering, because you get outside of, where you're comfortable. You get outside your comfort zone and you help somebody else. Helping another person, believe it or not, is one of the most important ways to move through depression. So I love volunteering. And I think the last thing is, notice what your body is inviting you into. So where do you feel it in your body? What is it wanting you to look at that maybe you're trying to push away from or avoid? Or maybe you're trying to look at other things externally rather than looking within. Everything is an invitation for us. And it's up to you whether you want to tend to that or you don't. And so that's really my 2 cents on, in this little time we have, for you to work through depression.
It's awesome. Well, like I said, Kristen Boice, you are awesome to help us tackle this, because again, I think it's on the front doorstep of many people's lives right now, whether it be seasonal or clinical, to be able to identify and know that there are resources out there, and that there are coping strategies, that you are not alone. Those statistics are incredible. And should be eye-opening for everybody. So thank you again for your time today. I know you just list off coping strategies, but I'm gonna let you hammer it one more time. If somebody's in a crisis, where do they go right now?
988.
Boom.
988. My husband just learned about this last night. I'm like, what do you mean? We've been talking about 988 for.
Thanks for watching, Mark.
Oh, I didn't know. I go, what's on Mental Health Monday? So 988, that is the number. Use it. And the teens love 988. This is my daughters are like, Dad, it's everywhere. 988. All my friends know about 988. This is the key. Pass it along to those you love. Pass it along to your children. Make sure they know about 988, please.
Yep.
If you have grandkids, tell them. Even if they already know, tell them again. Text, call 24 hours a day.
Well, and like you said, what the Boice Girls said, I think one of our biggest leave behinds, Kristen, is that we're raising a generation who are comfortable around mental health, that will know 988 just like our generation knows 911. And that's the best thing we can do for the future. So thank you, Kristen Boice. We'll be back next month with a holiday edition on how to survive those holidays. This is a great little precursor to that, but stay tuned. Follow along with us on Facebook. Kristen Boice, as always, thank you for your help today and your giving of your time. So happy Thanksgiving and happy holidays, and we'll see you back here next month. Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you.
All right.